Question. Dear Kim, one of the biggest illusions on earth is that I am my body. I am my mind. I am my persona. I'm separate. If I work hard enough to destroy those separate selves, does that mean that all the separate selves that surrounded them will die as well? Or does it not work like that, and I have to remove each small separate self one after another until the biggest lies fall? Well, yes and no, I have to say, because it's true that part of the spiritual path, and this has in the East been called the process of self-inquiry. Who am I, or what am I? And so the first thing is you are realizing, am I my physical body? And if you're open to spirituality, you at some point you realize, you experience really, I'm not my physical body. And when I say experience, it's one of these aha experiences. It's like a breakthrough. It's like you suddenly see it. It's not that you understand it intellectually. You see it with clarity. You're experiencing, I'm not the body. I'm more than the body. It just becomes obvious to you. And then the next level up, I'm more than my feelings. Therefore, I don't have to be always colored by my feelings. I can actually distance myself from the feelings. I can step back from the feelings and look at, why do I have these feelings? And then the next thing, I am more than my thoughts. That means you can then step back and look at, do you have certain thought patterns? Do you have this sense that you always need to understand and analyze every situation, so you keep going over a situation again and again and again? And then finally, you can step back and realize, I'm not my identity, because as you were growing up in this lifetime and even in past lifetimes, you were programmed to see yourself in a certain way. I'm a man, I'm a woman, I'm Danish, I'm white, I'm this religion, that religion. All these kind of things that are put upon us, and you can see you are more than that. And that process of self-inquiry is sort of the foundation, the preparation, or this process I'm talking about of a separate self, the separate selves. And so the person is asking, and you can say, I usually put it this way, there are many specific separate selves that are created to deal with specific situations. But the moment we stepped into separation and suddenly our sense of self as a connected being died and we were reborn into a sense of being a separate self, that's when we created the first separate self, which is what I generally call the ego. So the ego is made up of all of the other specific selves, but behind that is what the person talks about, I am separate. Because that's the basic illusion on earth. You know, the biggest illusion on earth is I'm a separate being. And so the person is saying, if I work hard enough to destroy those separate selves, does that mean that all the separate selves that are around them will die as well? And I would put it a little bit differently, because the way I have certainly experienced it is that you start seeing some of the more specific separate selves that are created in reaction to specific situations. So you have a self that makes you react with anger when you don't get your way, or you get disappointed, or you start grumbling, or whatever. So you start working through those selves, and I think you have to work through a certain amount of these specific selves before you can even see the central separate self, that I'm a separate being, the ego. Perhaps you can go right to that self. I don't know. I doubt it, because it's just so well hidden behind all the others. You know, if you think, if you have a self, for example, that makes you think, it's okay to be angry when people won't do what I tell them to do. That's going to block you from seeing that the angry self is really just, it's a consequence of you coming to see yourself as a separate being, where you think that you as a separate being have a right to tell other people what to do, and to be angry if they don't. because you think you should always be right and they should do what you think they should do, even though they are separate beings and they see things differently. So I don't see how you can really see that central ego self until you've seen through a lot of the others. And I don't think even if you could see the separate self, that all the others would fall away. I have sometimes had situations where I felt like I was seeing certain selves and I was resolving these smaller selves. It's like I've used the analogy. You have a stream and there are rocks in the stream. And there is one big rock in the stream. But you try to move it and it's held in place by a bunch of smaller rocks. And so you can't lift up the big rock until you take at least some of the smaller rocks away that are holding it. But once you get that big rock out, there may still be other rocks that are associated with it. And once the big rock is out, it becomes so much easier to see the smaller ones. So to me, that's usually the procedure. You have to come to see a couple of the smaller selves before you see a deeper self. Then when you remove that, there's still some cleanup to do, but it's much easier now. And so I'm not saying you can't get to a point where you can do that with the ego also, because I think you can get to a point where the illusion that you are a separate being has fallen away, but you can still have some of these dualistic selves that you picked up over many lifetimes that once in a while one of them comes to the surface and you look at it and deal with it. So I don't know, I hope this answers the question. Because I guess the answer is, it isn't a yes or no answer, it's that there are different situations. But in general, I would say, work on whatever you can see. Don't try to overreach. You see a clear reaction in yourself, work on that reaction, work on that self. Because what happens so many times is you see one self, and then because you remove that, now you see more clearly a self that was hidden behind it. And you can gradually work your way down that way. I would comment on one thing. If I work hard enough to destroy those separate selves, does that mean all the separate selves that surround it will die as well? You're not destroying a separate self. You can't destroy a separate self. It's not constructive to look at it. You're destroying a self. What the Masters always are saying, you are letting it die. There's a big difference between letting it die and trying to destroy it. Because when you're trying to destroy something, you're using force. That means you're actually using another separate self to try and destroy another self, and it's not going to work. You're just going to reinforce it. So the idea is you use the spiritual tools to dissolve the energy that makes up the self, or that is embodied in the self. Then it becomes easier to see the illusion. Then you look for the belief, the illusion behind the self. And in some cases, when you see that illusion, the self actually dissolves, and it just dies. But in other cases, which if a deeper self, you have to reinforce the process over some time, meaning you see the illusion, but there's still remnants of the self. So that means the illusion comes up again later. And now you have to again see the illusion and dismiss it. And then you may have to do that several times before the self is gone. So that's why I'm saying you are letting it die. Because the thing is, what keeps the self alive is that you are feeding it your energy by believing in the lie. Say you have a self that reacts with anger. And you come to see it. And so you come to see the belief behind the self. But still, a week later, you are in another situation and you are again tempted to react with anger. So now you have to constantly decide, I'm not going to react with anger. That means you're not feeding the self energy. And you may have to do that several times until you get to a point where now you really see why it isn't necessary to respond with anger, and then the self is gone. But on the other hand, it is true that sometimes you can see a deeper self, and there were smaller selves that were kind of, they were outcomes of the bigger self. And if you remove the bigger self, it is easier to let go of the others. That's also true. It's not a simple black and white process, but once you log into it, you just kind of learn to go with it and give it a little bit of time. And you realize that it's going to work itself out over time.